हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको जॉन डन के बारे में बताएंगे। लाइफ ऑफ जॉन डन 1572 टू 1633। हेडिंग है पेरेंटेज एंड बर्थ। जॉन डन वाज बोर्न इन 1572। हिज नेम वाज pronounced as if spelled done and was humorously latinized as Johns, Johannes. Johannes Factus. His father was an ironmonger. His mother was a daughter of John Haywood, the epigrammatist and the grand niece of Sir Thomas More. Dunn's mother was a Roman Catholic and the son of brought up on the principle of the old faith. He lost his father at the age of 5. Heading education. He entered Hull Hart, Oxford at the early age of 11, and that because he would be spared at that age from taking the oath of supremacy. He did not take any degree either at Oxford or at Cambridge, where he later shifted in 1592. He entered Lincoln's Inn. He appears to have been already a member of Thebes Inn. He did not seriously pursue his legal studies. He was rather busy writing verses for Ben Jonson says. He had written all his best pieces era. He was 25 years old. In 1596, he served as a volunteer in the expedition of Cadiz, and next year he went to the Azores, on each occasion being accompanied by Sir Henry Bottom. On the second of these voyages, they made friends with Sir Thomas Egerton the Younger, to whom Dunn later owed his appointment as private secretary of his father, Sir Thomas Egerton the Elder, who had been appointed Lord Keeper in 1596. Heading Dunn's love marriage. A busy and lucrative career was spoiled by Dunn himself when he clandestinely married Anne More, his master's niece. For this offence he was dismissed from office and imprisoned, when later released at the intercession of his father-in-law. He and his wife lived in great poverty. In fact, he had no very definite means of livelihood. For some time he lived with his wife's cousin Frances Woolley, and for a while with Sir Robert Drury. Dunn soon gained the favour of the latter by writing memorial verses on the death of his only daughter. These were the first Dunn's poems to be printed in his lifetime. Most of his poems circulated in manuscript and were not published until 2 years after his death. His satires and elegies were extremely popular. He assisted Thomas Morton, afterwards Bishop of Durham, to root the Jesuits in argument, and wrote a curious prose tract, Beyond Thanatos, in defense of suicide, and another polemical work, Pseudo-Martyr, which James first liked. In 1615, Dunn took order in compliance with the king's wish. He had held off so long, partly from scruples about his unworthiness and partly from hopes of a better secular appointment, his financial qualities seemed to have come to an end now. In 1616, he became divinity reader at Lincoln's Inn, and in 1621 he was made Dean of St. Paul's. He threw himself with his characteristic fervor into his new career. He was marked down for a bishopric when a fatal illness began to strike him. His sermons were famous. They are a splendid example of pulpit eloquence. There was a gap of more than 30 years between the composition and the publication of his poems. Many poems by other hands were fathered on him, and his genuine poems were often corrupted. Collection of his poems appeared in 1633 and 1649. He wrote songs, elegies, satires, all bearing evidence of his fervid, tumultuous passion and the chiaroscuro of his poetic genius. His songs are mostly real songs intended to be set of music. In 1619, on removal of Dr. Carey Carey, the then Dean of St. Paul's, Dunn was commanded to attend on the king at dinner. The king explained why he was thus honored. Dr. Dunn, I have invited you to dinner, and though you sit not down with me, yet I will carve to you of a dish that I know you love well, for knowing you love London, I do therefore make you Dean of St. Paul's, and when I have dined, then do you take your belonged dish home to your study. Say grace there to yourself, and much good may it too do you. Soon after his appointment, Dunn became popular for charity and preaching. He was appointed by the king to preach many sermons, and was also chosen prolocutor to the convocation in Parliament. Many were jealous of him. Some of them endeavoured to poison the king's mind against the dean by insinuating that in one of his sermons he had accused the king of leaning towards papacy. His Majesty took offence at this. The dean was, however, able to set matters right, and the king had no more suspicion. Even as a child, he was envied with Catholic tutor who tried to prepare him for the Catholic cases. Catholicism at that time not only was regarded as inimical to the Anglican Church but also to the interest of the state. The Catholics were persecuted. The teaching produced little effect on Dunn's mind. Recalling his early education, Dunn observed, I had my first breeding and conversation with men of suppressed and afflicted religion, accustomed to the despite of death and hungry of an imagined martyrdom. In this period, his first attempt at writing poetry appears. The first attempts were the three satires which he wrote in 1593. These satires reveals an ebullient but questioning and doubting mind, ridiculing conventional and serious things like Dunn rejected Catholicism and accepted Jacobin Anglicanism. Arguments have centered round the question of his sincerity. Doubt about his sincerity are raised because of his continued intellectual skepticism and spiritual uncertainty. Dunn could never attain spiritual repose or placid happiness. He was a perpetually agile intellect, probing and analyzing experience, and never attaining the peace of mind. To quote Gerson H. Duns, he was a poetic temperament, imaginative, susceptible, impulsive, served by an acute and subtle intellect, and under the influence of diverse elements in his nature. He he complied with circumstances more than once in his life, but such compliance does not make for peace and of mind. Dunn's spiritual unrest, even till the end of his life, is an evidence of his utter sincerity to life experiences. He remained true to his own self. His conscience remained always troubled and made no secret of it. Duns was basically a poet's sensibility. He yearned for a religious faith. The next 4 years, 1595 to 1598, were years of hectic activity in the affairs of the world and of a number of songs and sonnets. He participated in exciting adventure. He got himself a job in foreign service under the Earl of Essex and was with him on board the Repulse in the great expedition against Cadiz. He again accompanied Essex to the Azores and had the excitement of the adventure. It was in 1600 that he finally returned to England and became private secretary to Sir Thomas Egerton. The period from 1595 to 1601 was the period of Dunn's vigorous creative output. With him, the worldly and the creative activities band together. His poetry literally transcribe the diversified, shifting actual experience. To this period belong two satires, the most audacious of the elegies and the scornful, cynical love poems such as the song Goa Goe and Catch a Falling Stray and Love's Alchemy, poems of passionate love too, such as the Good Morrows, the Sunne Rising, the Canonization, and the Ecstasy Faithful, record the exploit of the passionate young man's sex adventures with varied sort of women, and yet these are not sensual, as Sir Gerson has pointed out. Hot blood and passionate, the Dunn was with a passion in which body and soul are sometimes inextricably blended, again in open conflict and again conceived in abstract separation from one another, but sensual in a more general and deliberate way without the appeal of passion. His poetry has nothing to say of the pleasures of eating and drinking like that of his friend Ben Jonson, and the impression one gathers from poems records and later is one of the indifferent or even ascetic regard to such pleasure, not sensual nor sensuous, but passionate is the note of young Donne and his verse, an intense susceptibility to the fascination of sex, a fascination that at once allures and repels, enthralls and awakens a spirit of scornful rebellion. He ranges through the whole gamut of passion, from its earthliest to its most abstractly detached moods. These early poems excel in passionate vigor and variety of moods, as also in the metaphysical treatment of the earthly sex experiences. They Do not exhaust Donne's talent. Poem of more complex structure of a super craftsmanship were written during the next period 1600 to 1604. In 1608 his father-in-law was reconciled to him. By then he was thoroughly disillusioned with the ways of the world, and he developed a bitter attitude toward the poem of this period, expressing positive faith in the love of his wife, such as the valediction poem, the song Sweetest Love I Do Not Go, and others of a miscellaneous nature too were composed. The years from 1608 to 1615 were those of great mental conflict and financial troubles. He had a number of children, and they were ill-fed and ill-clad. His wife's health was falling fast, and spiritually he was torn between the urge to enter the clerical life and the impulse to stay out of it. He wrote a few of the holy sonnet and two of his bitter prose works, Biathanatos, Via Thanatos, and Pseudo, Pseudo Martyr. Bianthos, written in a crabbed style, in an apology for the principle of suicide, and is thus an index of Donne's spiritual conflict. But through these conflicts his soul was already progressing towards an acceptance of religious life. In 1610 he came to live with Sir Robert Drury of Hosted, and the same year Drury's only daughter Elizabeth met with an untimely death. In 1611 Donne wrote the famous two anniversaries, An Anatomy of the World and Progress of the Soul. They deal with his own bitter experience of the world. The two poems give us an idea of the progress of Donne's own soul towards heaven. Next heading है ordained as a priest. Early in 1615, after a prolonged period of vacillation and spiritual crisis, he was finally ordained in the Anglican Church as a priest. From then onwards, he led a life of devotion. Later, he was appointed royal chaplain, and Cambridge conferred the degree of divinity upon him. In 1617, his wife passed away, leaving behind 7 young children under his charge. The bereavement inspired him with a greater fervor of devotion to God, and soon his sermons were filled with genuine human passion for the certainty of God's grace. These sermons are in the typical 17th century poetical prose, full of fanciful images. Certain themes of his poems recur in his sermons. The techniques of treatment are the same in both. To quote Sir Grierson, Donne is the only English poet of the first rank who is also the great orator. It may be, as some have claimed, a greater orator than a poet, but in fact his poetry and his oratory have much in common. It is a poetry of talk, vigorous, unconventional, unpolished, yet felicitous, phrasing, his wit, his imagery, homely and erudite, all suggest one who is talking, arguing, expostulating, playing with his thoughts, but neither polishing his eloquence nor surrendering himself to the pure delight of song. But his talk is poetry because it is musically drawn out from line to line in surprisingly varied and elaborate stanza or paragraph. One of his famous sermons was preached before Charles I, and a half month before his death in 1621, he became Dean of St. Paul's Church, but 2 years later he suffered an attack of illness. By 1630, his health completely broken down, and on March 31st, 1631, John Donne's life came to its end. From Belton's account, Donne appears to be by birth an inquisitive, inquiring, questioning person. On the one hand, he pursued his natural urge and worldly desires. On the other, he was inclined to try to understand his own self in the light of his study of philosophy and religious. Even in the tempestuous days of his youth, according to Walton, he would leave his bed at 4 a.m. and study till 10 a.m. Evidence of his learning are found in his poems. He was of an inclusive mind, experiences gained from real life and those from reading books coalesced perfectly. His mind remained vigorously active throughout his life. After his ordination into the clerical life, he wrote little poetry and devoted all his resources to the service of the church. He wrote his best poems between 1593 to 1612. As Theodore Redpath has argued, Johnson's statement can at most be an evidence that the best poems of Donne, which he had seen by 1618, the year in which Johnson made the statement, were written before Donne was 25. Nevertheless, it is on the whole true that he wrote poems characteristics of a genius before 1601 to 1602. His later poems, with few exceptions, lack the compactness of the earlier pieces. Donne excelled in the short lyric form. His inspiration was of a brief duration. So long as it stayed, it worked at a high intensity, and longer poems, which requires sustained imagination and organization of thoughts and feeling on a large canvas, were beyond his creative talent. He was a conscious poet, but not a poet with an avowed ideal to pursue. He was an occasional poet, writing poems in response to feeling and thoughts stirred up by particular occasions. Donne did not care to publish his poems in his lifetime. He wrote them to the person concerned, and he meant them to be private. He was never bothered by his reading public. He could afford to be abstruse, complex, difficult, and philosophical because he was not writing for the laity. His poems were meant primarily for private reading and private circulation. The first volume of his selected poems, songs, and sonnets appeared 2 years after his death in 1633. Donne never prepared his own manuscript for publication nor corrected his published poems. Donne wrote various kinds of verses, satires, songs, lyrics, elegy, epithalamium or the marriage song, epistle, epigram, sonnet, and hymn or the divine song. He could have been an equally powerful writer of prose as his sermon show, but he is chiefly studied in our time as a writer of love songs, satires, and holy sonnets. Whatever kind of verse or prose he wrote, it is the same agile, inquiring, skeptic, arguing, inclusive sensibility at work. We cannot separate Donne, the writer of secular love poems, from Donne, the writer of holy sonnet. The two were never separate in Donne's experience. Thanks, best of luck.